in this region. So this typology, like I said, is a framework, and it is subject to modification and improvement. So I'll conclude with 2 slides. The first is, if we need to kind of bring in some semblance of groundwater security in this country, and given the fact that, Tushaar has written in his book that we are looking at a groundwater anarchy in this country, and he's also proposed a lot of mechanisms to tame that anarchy. I believe we need 3 phases or 3 things which are kind of phased out in terms of the urban water management in India. The first phase, as Mihir showed us in his talk, is really about mapping and participation, or participatory mapping. It ties very well into this whole aquifer mapping program that Mihir has been able to engineer as a part of the 12th five-year plan. But within that is embedded the demand mapping, which is really about the stakeholder database, who is using groundwater, who are the users, what are the kinds of uses. Can we convert drillers into data feeding mechanisms? What about the tanker operators? Where are they drawing from? Phase 2 is really the focus on recharge, and especially using the concept of managed aquifer recharge, which is now a globally accepted model for recharge. It has many dimensions. How can we link the demand side, which is the participatory groundwater management, to the supply augmentation side, which is the managed aquifer recharge component? Phase 3 is really about governance. And I believe in the urban space, we need a regulatory framework, primarily in securing groundwater from impacts of sanitation and waste disposal, but also in terms of protecting recharge zones. We also believe that it's important to bring in institutions. And I think in the previous discussion, somebody brought out this point that we need almost differentially thought out institutions in the context of that 6x4 matrix that Mihir presented. So it's about mapping, management, and governance. And on the basis of that, maybe we can initiate, within the pilots in Indore and Nagpur, we could initiate a new plan for groundwater management, which I believe has 3 components. Much of our thinking on groundwater is related to its extractive value. What is it that we can get out? In fact, much of the educational curricula today still talks about exploration of groundwater and extraction of groundwater. Where do I put my wells? Especially in an area where there already are 1,000 wells. So I don't think the question is really pertinent enough. We need to bring in the whole question of groundwater recharge and catchment plan, which I think in many ways kind of goes well with the whole river basin planning exercise, because it talks about an upstream intervention with groundwater. The second is the aquifer management plan, which talks about the in situ, the within the city, within the township intervention on groundwater. And third, I want to bring in this whole new dimension, and I think Professor Gosain touched upon it. Many of our rivers have turned influent from an effluent behavior. The groundwater contribution to rivers and streams in this country has significantly gone down as a consequence of groundwater exploitation. And I think this is a dimension that many people don't think about. So while we think about a recharge protection plan, we also must think about a discharge management plan. And I think the groundwater discharge zone protection plan is linked to the river improvement and river basin plan, especially from a downstream conservation protection point of view. I believe key activities are important. One is, I think we need to strengthen the data baseline. Second is, we need to build a strong framework of participatory planning. Third is to bring in the mapping, preservation, and revival of local water bodies and mainstream it into urban water planning, or urban planning per se. Working with industries to lower their water footprint, because the industry-urban interface is also quite strong in this country. Training and building capacities of relevant stakeholders. I think this was discussed sufficiently in the previous discussion. So before concluding, or my concluding slide, like I began with a slide, I'd like to conclude with a slide. This is one of the 6 major chumiks or spring systems that used to feed the town of Leh, say 20, 25 years ago. Leh has seen a transition through probably a couple of the stages that we showed you, that Mihir showed you and I showed you, Leh has seen a transition. And it has gone from Chumik-based water supply systems to the Indus water supply system, and now informally a huge, huge footprint through bore wells in the town of Leh. Now, all these traditional systems have been eroded. The Chumeks are not used as much as they were anymore. So I think it kind of pegs the whole issue of bringing all of these systems together as a part of an urban water security. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni, for giving a very nice presentation and elaborating on the hydrogeological setting in the country. I think one point which is, again, I'll re-emphasize that we need to really look at, when we talk of basin level, we have to see that what the basin can provide you, what is the sustainable level of abstraction from the basin. And many a times we are trying to play a role in terms of having some more basins beyond Ganga taken up in terms of the River Basin Management Plan formulation with the Central Water Commission. And we have already started that work. The idea is to look at, are these basins gone to a level where there's no more water resources development available or possible? Because you have already abstracted more in terms of, even you have depleted their environmental water also. There is no environmental demand which is being met by these systems. So how to bring it back? We have to, as a society, go to the level of doing the demand management, look at what is the proper demand of a city after doing the reuse of water, because by doing the reuse, your demand will be reduced by around 50%. Now, if that demand management is done, and you also bring in the higher efficiencies in the agriculture systems, because the amount of water which we have in our country is much more than what we require. If we start with that presumption, is only a demand management and the management issues which have to be taken up properly. The governance is very important, which Kulkarni has brought out very well, that without governance, we have to decide beyond this level is not sustainable, is not available. So you have no right to abstract any more water from the ground if you have achieved that in a city or in a context where there is more agriculture activities being done and people are taking without any query being raised by anybody. We will now request Dr. Tushaar Shah, who is a senior fellow with the International Water Management Institute at Anand, to make his comments on the presentation made by Dr. Kulkarni.
I actually don't have many comments to make on Himanshu's presentation, which I thought was excellent, and I already saw it reflected amply in Mihir's paper and his presentation. What I would like to do is to use this time given to me to make 5 or 6 broad points, some of which may have something to do with what Mihir presented in the discussion earlier in the morning. I want to begin by reminding that India is the world's largest groundwater economy. There is no country in the world which is as dependent on groundwater for all its needs as India has been. We depend on groundwater for most of our irrigation needs. We depend on groundwater for most of our urban as well as rural water supply needs. And therefore we are a special case. And the solutions that many other countries have developed to resolve problems that look similar to us may not be as appropriate to us because of the special nature of our irrigation economy. Himanshu mentioned briefly that managed aquifer recharge presents a very big opportunity for India. And I agree with him totally. I mean, just let's look at the arithmetic that according to the Central Groundwater Board, we pump about 230 to 240 billion cubic meters of groundwater, which is about 5.5 to 6% of our total precipitation. If we could increase this ratio from 5.5% to 6.5 or 7%, we don't really have a groundwater problem. But increasing this ratio by 1.5% is a big challenge. Now, there is a vast body of hydrogeological knowledge, also engineering knowledge, on managed aquifer recharge. But almost all of it is based on experience in Australia, in the Western US, where the idea of managed aquifer recharge is to find 100,000 hectares or 50,000 hectares of unpeopled land which have highly porous aquifers, and you impound large, vast quantity of storm water or rainwater or flood water, and you dispatch that water into highly porous formations and keep it there as a store, and when you need it, pump it out and transport it thousands of kilometers to meet urban needs. Now, if you take this idea of managed aquifer recharge, there is no way we can use this idea in India, because it will be very hard to find 100,000 hectares of unpeopled land where there is no human interference, which you can turn into a recharge basin. But that doesn't mean that we can't do aquifer recharge. Actually, there is a great deal of recharge that's going on in India. But the scientific discussions on the Indian recharge work are kind of very agnostic. I mean, you don't see a very clear assessment from hydrogeologists on whether what goes on in the name of recharge in India actually is, beneficial or not. And therefore, I really think that many of this existing body of knowledge that exists in the international, in the global arena on the solutions to water problems needs to be adapted to the specifics of the Indian situation. When I have parked myself in Gujarat for the past 25, 30 years, and there is a very large part of Gujarat called Saurashtra, which was, it's basically, Kutch is the same as Pakistan and Indian Punjab, which 200 years ago, before the British started building the lower Indus system, was basically just nomadic area. There was no settled agriculture. Everybody who lived there, they were just nomads. They used to keep cattle, and the only use you can put land to was grazing cattle. Now, of course, it's very highly populated, densely populated area, and there are large cultivated areas too. But Kutch did not have large irrigation systems. The lower Indus irrigation system did not extend up to Kutch, and therefore Kutch agriculture came to depend primarily on rainfall and on wells. And in 1986, 87, 88, there was a massive drought in which the economy of that region was ruined. And something clicked, and farmers there figured out that maybe when there is good monsoon, they should start impounding the flood waters of monsoon and start putting them into their open wells. Now, that's a hard rock area. It's actually basalt aquifer, limestone and basalt aquifer area. So farmers have vast wells. Their wells have 30-meter diameter, and they go down to 50, 60 meters. So each well itself is a small pond. So farmers started putting flood waters of rain into their wells, hoping that in the end of October, when the crop is ready to mature, if there is an early withdrawal of monsoon, then they can save the crop by providing a life-saving irrigation. So, it worked the way they had imagined, and then for the next 7, 8, 9 years, it became a massive popular movement for groundwater recharge, which started